The sun had barely risen over the vast city of Chicago when Emily stepped off the train and onto the platform. The familiar sound of metal on metal echoed through the station, a sound she had grown accustomed to over the years. She walked with purpose, her steel-toed boots clicking against the concrete floor as she navigated through the morning crowd. Emily was one of the few women in that sea of workers, but she had long since learned to ignore the curious glances that followed her. Her destination was the railway construction site, a massive project that promised to revolutionize the city's transportation system. It was also the most challenging mission of her career. As she approached the site, the landscape changed from the polished streets of downtown Chicago to the industrial zone, where towering cranes and unfinished tracks dominated the skyline. Emily had been on this project for almost a year, and each day was a battle to prove her worth. The men she worked with were seasoned veterans of the trade, and many had been skeptical when she first arrived. But Emily was nothing if not determined. She had earned her place through hard work and sheer tenacity, and she was proud of what she had accomplished so far. As she entered the site, she spotted John, her boss, talking to a group of workers near one of the tracks. John was an old-school engineer, the kind who believed in doing things the right way. He respected Emily, but she knew he still harbored doubts about her ability to handle the pressures of such a large project. "Good morning, John," Emily called as she approached. John turned and gave her a brief nod. "Good morning, Emily. We have a new hire starting today. I want you to show him around." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Another one? We've already had 2 new hires this month." John shrugged. "This one's different. He has experience. Just keep an eye on him. Okay?" Emily nodded, accepting the task without question. She already had a lot on her plate, but she couldn't afford to refuse. The success of the project depended on everyone doing their part, and if John wanted her to guide the new hire, so be it. She headed to the site office to grab her safety gear, mentally preparing herself for another long day. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, and the distant hum of machinery filled her ears. Despite the challenges, Emily loved her job. It was demanding, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the progress each day, knowing she was contributing to something that would benefit thousands of people. As she put on her hard hat and reflective vest, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. She didn't believe in fate, but there was a certain electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Shaking off the thought, she headed back to the site, ready to face whatever the day had in store. The day had barely begun when Emily noticed a figure standing near the entrance, observing the site as if absorbing every detail. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried an air of confidence that set him apart from the other workers. His clothes were practical, but there was something about the way he moved that caught Emily's attention. John was already approaching him, and Emily quickened her pace to join them. As she got closer, she noticed the man's hands, strong and calloused, but somehow too clean for someone in this line of work. "Emily, this is Michael," John said, introducing him. "He's the new hire I mentioned. I want you to show him around." Michael extended his hand, his grip firm and steady. "Nice to meet you, Emily." "Likewise," Emily replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Michael than met the eye. She turned to John, who was already walking away, leaving her alone with the newcomer. "So, what's your experience?" Emily asked, keeping her tone professional. "John said you have some." Michael smiled, a faint glint of amusement in his eyes. "I've worked on a few projects here and there. Thought it was time for a change." Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. His answer was vague, but she decided not to press further. Everyone had their reasons for being here, and it wasn't her place to pry, at least not yet. She led him around the site, pointing out the various sections of the project and the specific tasks each crew was handling. Michael listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking a question. He seemed genuinely interested in the work, which Emily appreciated. Often, new hires were either overconfident or completely overwhelmed, but Michael was neither. As they walked, Emily couldn't help but notice the way the other workers looked at Michael. There was a mix of curiosity and caution in their expressions, as if they were trying to figure him out. Emily felt the same way but kept her thoughts to herself. They arrived at a section of the track that was still under construction, and Emily paused to explain the process. "This part is critical," she said. "We need to make sure everything is perfectly aligned, or it could cause major problems down the road." Michael nodded, studying the work with focused intensity. "Got it. What's been the biggest challenge you've faced so far?" Emily hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Honestly, it's been getting everyone on the same page. There's a lot of pressure to meet deadlines, and sometimes it feels like we're all just trying to keep our heads above water." Michael looked at her, his gaze steady. "Seems like you're doing a great job. This isn't an easy project." Emily felt a warmth in her chest at his words, though she quickly pushed it aside. Compliments were nice, but they didn't get the job done. "Thanks, but we still have a long way to go." They spent the rest of the morning touring the site, with Emily explaining the complexities of the project and Michael asking thoughtful questions. By the time they returned to the main office, Emily found herself cautiously impressed. Michael might be new, but he had a sharp mind and a genuine interest in the work. When they finished the tour, Michael turned to her with a smile. "Thanks for showing me around. I'm looking forward to working with you." "Same here," Emily replied, though she couldn't help but wonder what had brought him to this project. There was something about Michael that didn't quite add up, but she couldn't put her finger on it. For now, she decided to focus on the work ahead, but she knew Michael was someone she would have to keep an eye on. The following weeks passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights, the project demanding more and more from Emily and her team as the deadline approached. Despite the growing pressure, Michael quickly integrated into the group, proving to be both capable and reliable. He took on tasks with a calm determination that impressed Emily, and more than once she found herself relying on his insights to solve particularly complex problems. As they worked together, a cautious friendship began to form. Michael was easy to talk to, his calm demeanor a welcome relief amid the often chaotic work environment. Emily appreciated his ability to stay cool under pressure, and she found herself seeking his opinion more often than she had anticipated. One afternoon, as they reviewed the blueprints for a critical section of the track, Michael pointed out a potential issue that Emily had overlooked. "This angle here," he said, tapping the paper with his pen. "It could cause a problem when the trains make the turn. We can reinforce it, but it might set us back a day or two." Emily frowned, leaning in to take a closer look. He was right. If they didn't address it now, it could lead to bigger problems down the line. She sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. "You're right. We'll have to reinforce it, even if it means delaying the schedule." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'll talk to the crew. We can work some extra hours to make up for the lost time." Emily looked at him, surprised by the offer. "You don't have to do that. It's not your responsibility to cover the delay." Michael shrugged. "We're all in this together, right? Besides, I don't mind putting in the extra hours if it means doing the job right." Emily studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. There was something about Michael that continued to intrigue her. He was too good at this, too experienced for someone who was supposedly new to the project. And yet, she couldn't deny that he had been nothing but helpful. "Thanks, Michael," she said finally. "I appreciate it." He smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "No problem, Emily. Let's get it done." As he walked away to talk to the crew, Emily watched him go, her thoughts spinning. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Michael than he was letting on. But for now, she was grateful to have him by her side. In the days that followed, Emily and Michael spent more time together, coordinating the reinforcement and ensuring that the project stayed on track. The long hours and shared challenges brought them closer, and Emily began to trust Michael in a way she hadn't trusted anyone else on the team. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Michael suggested they grab a coffee before heading home. Emily hesitated, her professional instincts warning her not to mix work and personal life. But she was tired, and the idea of a moment of peace away from the worksite was too tempting to resist. They found a small cafe not far from the site, and as they sat down with their drinks, Emily felt a rare sense of relaxation wash over her. It was strange to be there with Michael outside of work, but it wasn't unpleasant. "You've been doing a great job," Michael said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I don't think I've ever worked with someone as dedicated as you." Emily smiled, though she felt a pang of guilt. "Thanks, but it's not just me. Everyone's been working really hard." "True, but you're the one leading them. That counts for a lot." She looked down at her coffee, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't something she was used to, especially not from someone she was starting to consider a friend. "I'm just trying to do my best," she said finally. Michael nodded, his gaze steady. "That's all anyone can ask for." They fell back into silence, but this time it was a comfortable one. When they finished their drinks and prepared to leave, Emily couldn't help but feel that something had changed between them. There was a growing trust, a mutual respect that went beyond the boundaries of the project. But even as she acknowledged this, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her that Michael was still an enigma, and until she figured him out, she would need to be careful. As the project neared its final stages, the pressure to meet the deadline intensified. The team was stretched thin, working long hours to ensure everything was in order. Emily felt the strain acutely. Every decision seemed to carry the weight of the entire project, and there was no room for mistakes. Michael continued to be a constant presence at her side, offering support and insights whenever necessary. But as they pressed on, new challenges began to emerge, threatening to derail their progress. Equipment failures, material shortages, and unforeseen structural issues piled up, each demanding immediate attention. The most pressing concern, however, came from outside the team. A rival company, which had lost the original bid for the project, started causing trouble. They spread rumors about safety violations and financial mismanagement, trying to undermine the credibility of Emily and her team. The media caught wind of the rumors, and soon journalists were swarming the site, looking for any sign of trouble. John called an emergency meeting to address the situation. The tension in the room was palpable as Emily, Michael, and the other team leaders gathered around the conference table. "We need to get ahead of this," John said, his tone urgent. "If these rumors keep spreading, they could shut us down. We can't afford any delays, especially now." Emily nodded, her mind working quickly. "We need to be transparent and proactive. Let's invite the media to visit the site. Show them that we're operating by the book and that the project is on schedule." John considered the suggestion, then looked at Michael. "What do you think?" Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "It's a good idea. We should also prepare a statement addressing the rumors directly, highlighting the safety protocols we've followed from the start. The more open we are, the less power these rumors will have." John nodded. "All right, let's do it. Emily, I want you to lead the media tour. You're the face of this project, and we need to show them you're in control." Emily's stomach tightened at the thought, but she knew he was right. She couldn't afford to show any weakness now. "I'll take care of it," she said, her voice firm. The next day, Emily found herself standing in front of a group of journalists, their cameras and microphones pointed at her as she led them around the site. She spoke with confidence, explaining each stage of the project and emphasizing the safety measures in place. Michael stayed close by, offering silent support but letting Emily take the lead. When they reached the section of the track they had recently reinforced, one of the journalists, a sharp-eyed woman with a determined expression, stepped forward. "There are reports that this area was compromised during construction. Can you confirm that?" Emily held her gaze steadily. "We identified a potential issue and resolved it immediately. The structure is now reinforced to exceed safety standards. Our priority has always been the safety and reliability of this project." The journalist didn't seem completely convinced, but before she could press further, Michael stepped in. "I've been working closely with Emily on this project, and I can assure you that every decision has been made with the utmost care and precision. We're confident in the work we've done here." The calm authority in his tone seemed to have an effect, and the journalist nodded, taking notes in her notepad before stepping back. The rest of the tour went off without incident, and by the end, Emily felt a sense of relief. The media seemed satisfied, and she hoped it would put the rumors to rest. As the journalists departed, Michael turned to Emily, a slight smile playing on his lips. "You handled that well." "Thanks," Emily replied, though her mind was already on the next challenge. "But we're not out of the woods yet." "No, we're not," Michael agreed. "But we're getting close." That night, as Emily reviewed the day's events, she couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The external pressures were mounting, and though she trusted her team, the constant barrage of challenges was wearing her down. She knew she had to keep going, but the thought of what might happen if they didn't meet the deadline loomed large in her mind. And as much as she appreciated Michael's support, the nagging suspicion that he was hiding something never completely left her. For now, though, there was no time to worry about that. The project came first, and she would do whatever it took to see it through to the end. The project was finally starting to stabilize. The equipment issues had been resolved, the media frenzy had died down, and the team was making steady progress toward the finish line. Emily felt a cautious optimism returning, even if the workload remained relentless. Michael's presence had become something she relied on, his constant support an anchor in the chaos that surrounded them. But just as things seemed to be calming down, the balance was shattered by an unexpected visit. One morning, as Emily reviewed the progress reports in the site office, she was interrupted by a commotion outside. She stepped out to see a sleek black car pulling up to the entrance, followed by several other vehicles, each more imposing than the last. John emerged from his office, a look of disapproval on his face as he watched the convoy come to a stop. "What's going on?" Emily asked, walking over to him. John shook his head, his expression grim. "I'm not sure, but this doesn't look good." The doors of the lead car opened, and a well-dressed man in his 50s stepped out, flanked by a team of security. Emily recognized him immediately, Richard Harris, the billionaire owner of the company financing the railway project. His sudden appearance could only mean one thing. Something big was about to happen. Richard walked toward them, his sharp gaze sweeping over the site. John and Emily exchanged a quick glance before moving forward to greet him. "Mr. Harris," John began, his tone respectful but cautious. "We weren't expecting you." Richard barely acknowledged him, his eyes already scanning the workers bustling around the site. "I'm here to check on the progress. This project is critical, and I want to see firsthand how things are going." Emily felt a chill of unease run down her spine. This was more than a routine visit. Before she could think further on it, Richard's gaze landed on someone behind her, and his expression shifted to one of surprise, then recognition. "Michael?" he called, his voice carrying across the site. Emily turned to see Michael standing a few feet away, his face pale and his posture tense. The casual, easygoing demeanor she had come to associate with him had vanished, replaced by something far more reserved. Richard's eyes narrowed as he took in Michael's appearance. Dressed in the same work clothes as the other laborers, his hands still holding the tools he had been using moments before. "What the hell are you doing here? Dressed like that?" For a moment there was silence. Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest, a sense of dread growing inside her. This was the moment when everything would change. Michael took a deep breath and stepped forward, meeting Richard's gaze with a mix of defiance and resignation. "I'm working, Dad," he said, his voice low. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Dad?" The word echoed in her mind as the realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Michael wasn't just another worker. He was Richard Harris's son, the heir to the entire Harris fortune. She looked at Michael, her mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. The vague answers, the impeccable manners, the unexpected experience. It all made sense now. And yet, the revelation left her reeling, a mix of shock and betrayal flooding her senses. Richard's expression shifted to one of disapproval. "So this is how you've been spending your time? Playing construction worker?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I'm not playing, Dad. I wanted to understand the project from the ground up, see what it's really like for the people who do the work." Richard's gaze drifted to Emily, his eyes narrowing. "And who is this?" Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "This is Emily, the chief engineer on the project. She's been doing an excellent job." Richard's eyes fixed on her, and Emily felt herself shrink under his scrutinizing gaze. She had worked so hard to earn respect in her field, to prove herself as a capable leader, and now it felt like it was all crumbling around her. "I see," Richard said finally, his tone dry. "Well, I don't have time for games, Michael. I expect you to return to your responsibilities immediately. This project is too important to be treated like some sort of experiment." Michael's gaze softened as he looked at Emily, but she couldn't meet his eyes. She felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her, leaving her adrift in a sea of confusion and hurt. Without another word, Richard turned and headed back to his car, his entourage following closely behind. The cars pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence that was almost deafening. Emily finally found her voice, though it was weak. "You're Richard Harris's son." Michael nodded, his expression pained. "I was going to tell you, Emily. I just didn't know how." She shook her head, disbelief mingling with the sting of betrayal. "So what was this? Some kind of experiment for you? Pretending to be someone else? Messing with us?" "It wasn't like that," Michael said quickly, taking a step toward her. "I wanted to see the project from the inside, understand what it really takes to make something like this happen. And then I met you, and it became more than that." Emily took a step back, her emotions a storm of anger, hurt, and confusion. "You lied to me, Michael. You made me trust you, and now, I don't even know who you are." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, needing to put distance between them before her emotions overwhelmed her. The days that followed the revelation were some of the hardest Emily had ever experienced. She threw herself into her work with renewed determination, avoiding Michael at all costs. The project was too important to let her emotions get in the way, and she refused to let her feelings compromise the progress they had made. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the constant sense of unease in her chest. Every time she saw Michael on sight, she felt a mix of anger and sadness. He had deceived her. There was no getting around that fact. And yet, the memories of the moments they had shared, the conversations and the connection that had blossomed between them, refused to leave her mind. She began to question everything. Had anything been real? Or had she simply been a pawn in some twisted game of his? The uncertainty gnawed at her, eroding the trust she had once felt so deeply. Michael, for his part, seemed determined to make amends. He continued to show up at the site every day, taking on the same tasks as before, but now with a visible tension in his posture. Emily could see that he wanted to talk, to explain himself, but she wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. John, ever perceptive, noticed the change between them. One afternoon, as they reviewed the latest project updates, he gave her a long, searching look. "You've been quiet lately," he observed. Emily shrugged, not trusting herself to speak without letting her emotions show. "Just focused on the project." John nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "I heard about what happened with Michael. Must have been a shock." She stiffened, her hands clenching into fists. "I don't want to talk about it." "That's fine," John said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "But you know, people aren't always what they seem. That doesn't mean they're bad. Sometimes they're just complicated." Emily wanted to argue, to tell him there was nothing complicated about lying. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with memories of Michael's quiet support, his thoughtful questions, and the genuine care she had seen in his eyes. "Maybe," she conceded, though the admission left a bitter taste in her mouth. That night, as Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she replayed the events of the past weeks in her mind. It was impossible to deny that Michael had become an integral part of the team, that his insights and hard work had helped overcome some of the project's toughest challenges. But could she ever trust him again, knowing what she now knew? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She picked it up, expecting to see a message from John or another team member. Instead, she saw Michael's name on the screen. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, leaving the message unanswered. But something inside her compelled her to open it. "Emily, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you from the start. I never meant to hurt you. Please, let me explain." She stared at the message, her emotions a chaotic swirl. Part of her wanted to respond, to let him try to make things right. But another part, the part that still felt the sting of betrayal, couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she placed the phone back on the nightstand and turned over, pulling the covers up around her. Sleep didn't come easily that night, her mind refusing to quiet as she wrestled with the conflicting emotions that roiled within her. The next day, Emily arrived at the site determined to stay focused. She couldn't let her personal life interfere with her work, not when they were so close to the finish line. The team needed her to be strong, to lead them through these final stages without faltering. But as the day wore on, she found it increasingly difficult to keep her emotions in check. The tension between her and Michael was palpable, and it didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the team. Whispers circulated, and Emily caught more than one curious glance in her direction. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the site, Emily was exhausted. She retreated to the small office, seeking a moment of solitude to collect her thoughts. But her respite was brief. A knock on the door interrupted her, and she looked up to see Michael standing in the doorway. His expression was serious, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone gentle. Emily hesitated, every instinct telling her to push him away. But something in his gaze stopped her. With a sigh, she nodded. "All right." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Emily, I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was scared. Scared that you would see me differently if you knew who I really was." "You're right," Emily said, her voice tense. "I do see you differently now." Michael flinched, but he didn't look away. "I understand that, but everything we shared, everything we worked on together, that was real. I never wanted to deceive you, and I hate that I hurt you." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to let the anger that had been building inside her dissipate. But the wound was still too fresh, the trust too fragile. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded slowly, accepting her words with a resigned sadness. "I understand. But I'm not going anywhere, Emily. I'll be here working alongside you just like before. And maybe with time, you'll see that I'm not the person you think I am." Emily didn't respond, her mind too clouded with doubt. But as Michael turned to leave, she found herself wishing, against all odds, that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Chapter 7. Climax and Resolution. 1,000 words. The last days of the project arrived with a sense of urgency. The team worked tirelessly, overcoming exhaustion and the relentless demands of the final deadline. Emily, despite her internal turmoil, was determined to ensure that everything was completed on time and to the highest quality. There was no room for errors now, not when they were so close to the finish line. Michael kept his promise, showing up every day and working alongside the team with the same dedication he had demonstrated from the beginning. But despite his efforts to rebuild trust between them, Emily continued to keep her distance. She couldn't afford to let her guard down again, not with so much at stake. On the night before the final inspection, the site was a hive of activity. The team was working late, ensuring that every last detail was perfect. Emily moved from one section to another, checking and rechecking the work. The air was thick with tension, each team member aware of how crucial these final hours were. As the night wore on, Emily found herself alone in the control room, reviewing the final plans. The dim light from the computer screen cast shadows across her face, and the only sound was the soft hum of the machines around her. She should have felt a sense of accomplishment, but instead, there was only a deep exhaustion, both physical and emotional. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Michael standing in the doorway, his expression cautious. "Can I come in?" he asked. Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure." Michael entered, closing the door behind him. For a moment, they both remained silent, the tension between them almost palpable. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," Michael finally said, his voice low. Emily let out a small, tired laugh. "I'm fine. Just trying to make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." Michael nodded, his gaze steady. "You've done an incredible job, Emily. This project wouldn't have come this far without you." "Thank you," Emily replied, though there was little emotion in her voice. "But it wasn't just me. It was the whole team." "True," Michael agreed. "But you were the one leading them. You made this happen." There was a sincerity in his tone that caused Emily's chest to tighten. She had spent so much energy keeping him at arm's length, keeping her emotions in check, but in that moment, with the project on the verge of completion, she couldn't deny the weight of his words. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," Michael replied. "I just wanted you to know how much I admire you, not just for your work, but for who you are." Emily looked down at the plans in front of her, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She had spent so long trying to protect herself from further hurt, but now, with Michael there, offering nothing but support, she felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. Before she could respond, the door to the control room suddenly opened, and John rushed in, his expression anxious. "We've got a problem," he said urgently. "There's been a failure in the new section of the track. We need to fix it before tomorrow's inspection, or the entire project could be delayed." Emily's heart sank. This was the last thing they needed. She quickly grabbed the plans and followed John out of the control room, with Michael close behind. When they reached the site of the problem, they found the crew already working on the repair. The failure was more serious than Emily had feared. A critical component of the track had been installed incorrectly, and if it wasn't fixed immediately, it could compromise the entire project. Emily didn't hesitate. She immediately took charge, directing the crew and coordinating the repairs with the precision and determination that had become her trademark. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing them closer to the deadline, but she refused to let the pressure affect her. Michael worked alongside her, his presence a steadying force as they raced against the clock. There was no time for words, only action, as they fought to save the project they had both invested so much in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the repairs were completed. Emily watched as the last piece was secured into place, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," John said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We really did it." Emily allowed herself a small smile, though she knew the true test was still to come. The inspection was just hours away, and they would have to wait to see if their efforts had been enough. As the crew began to wind down for the night, Michael approached Emily, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting me enough to work with me tonight." Emily looked at him, the words she had been holding back for so long finally rising to the surface. "I'm still hurt, Michael. I don't know if I can fully forgive you, but I do know that tonight we did something important together. And maybe that's a start." Michael nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I'll take that." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the night's events settling over them. There was still so much left unsaid, so much that needed to be resolved, but for now they had done what needed to be done. And as they prepared to face the final test, Emily couldn't help but feel a small spark of optimism. Maybe, after everything, there was still a chance for something real to grow between them. The morning of the inspection dawned clear and crisp, the sun casting a golden light over the site. Emily arrived early, her nerves on edge as she prepared for the final evaluation. The team had done everything they could to ensure success, but now all they could do was wait. The inspectors arrived promptly, a group of stern-faced officials who wasted no time in getting to work. Emily stood at the edge of the site, watching as they meticulously examined every aspect of the project. Michael was by her side, his presence a quiet comfort. For hours, the inspectors combed through the site, checking and rechecking every detail. Emily's heart raced with each passing minute, the tension mounting as they neared the final section of the track. the very one they had repaired the night before. When the lead inspector finally straightened up and turned to face them, Emily held her breath. "Everything is in order," he said, his tone professional but with a hint of approval. "The project meets all required standards. You've done an excellent job." A profound sense of relief washed over Emily, nearly overwhelming her. She exchanged a glance with Michael, and for the first time in days, a genuine smile crossed her face. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. The inspector nodded before walking away, leaving Emily and Michael alone in the moment of triumph. "We did it," Michael said softly, the words heavy with meaning. "We did," Emily agreed, feeling a sense of accomplishment and closure she hadn't expected. The project was complete, and despite all the challenges, they had succeeded. As the team gathered to celebrate, Emily stepped away for a moment, needing a quiet space to process everything that had happened. She found a spot on the edge of the site, the sounds of the celebration fading into the background. Michael found her a few minutes later, his expression thoughtful. "It's hard to believe it's over," he said, standing beside her. "Yeah," Emily agreed. "It was a lot." Michael nodded, his gaze distant as he looked out over the site. "Emily, I know things haven't been easy between us, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but I meant what I said before. Everything we shared, everything we worked on together, it was real." Emily looked at him, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the layers of hurt and doubt that had clouded her heart. "I know it was real," she said softly, "but trust isn't something that comes back overnight. It's going to take time." "I understand," Michael replied, his voice gentle. "I'm willing to wait, Emily, for as long as it takes." They stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on them. But in that moment, Emily felt something shift. A small opening, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. "Let's start with something small," she finally said, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "How about a cup of coffee? No pressure. Just a new beginning." Michael's eyes lit up, and he returned her smile. "I'd like that." As they walked back to join the group, Emily felt a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. The project was complete, and the future, once so uncertain, now held the promise of new beginnings. There were no guarantees, but for the first time in weeks, Emily was ready to embrace whatever came next. The celebration continued into the evening, the team savoring the hard-earned success. Emily found herself surrounded by her colleagues, their shared triumph a testament to months of hard work and perseverance. Michael stayed close by, his presence a steady comfort she had come to appreciate more than she ever thought possible. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the site, Emily allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The project had been one of the most challenging experiences of her life, pushing her to her limits and forcing her to confront truths about herself and those around her. But in the end, she had emerged stronger, more confident in herself and her abilities. And though the path ahead with Michael was still uncertain, she knew one thing. She was ready to face whatever challenges came her way, confident that she had the strength and resilience to overcome them. "Here's to new beginnings," Michael said softly beside her, raising his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," Emily echoed, clinking her glass against his. And as they stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. The road ahead might be long and winding, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to walk it, one step at a time.